All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next to last episode before the election of our Vote Proud New York initiative, the LGBT Network's Vote Proud New York initiative, which is a organizing and mobilizing campaign to get everyone out to vote, to get people registered, to start early voting here in New York next this Saturday. This Saturday. Oh my God, it's coming up, Louis. we get to
Yeah.
start we get to start to vote early, and that hopefully 2 weeks from now, everyone has watched all these programs and made sure that they were registered to vote, know where to vote. And we're going to hear more tonight about protecting our votes. We're also going to hear about some other fabulous stuff tonight. So continue making sure to get the word out and make sure that everyone goes out to vote between this Saturday and 2 weeks from today in New York. And then certainly calling all of our friends and family across the nation to make sure that they come out to vote. But today we have some very special guests with us that we're going to hear some really great stuff, including New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, labor leaders, more than labor leaders, but we're going to talk a little bit more about them soon. Stuart Applebaum and Anthony Macagnoni. And we do have a candidate from the United States 2nd Congressional District, Jackie Gordon, with us tonight. And as a reminder, to text Vote Proud to 484848 to find your polling place and to find out where you can go to vote early voting and some other pertinent information that will be there for you. And you could join the Vote Proud movement as a volunteer by also texting that number so that we make some calls that day to make sure that the vote does get out. So Louis, before we bring on our first speaker, there's been a lot that's gone on since we met 2 weeks ago. There was a debate with a fly on someone's head, right? But more so than that, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the news which just really underscore the importance of this election even more. And we're going to hear more from our guests today about what's at stake. And part of that is in the state of Texas. Just 2 days ago, one of the regulatory bodies for social work, of all things, and I'm a social worker, social work educator, and one of the core principles of our profession and our sector is about human dignity, human rights, and fighting against discrimination. Well, the regulatory body in Texas, under the leadership of Governor Abbott, said that social workers can discriminate against LGBTQ folks or refuse them service. And now this includes social workers in healthcare and et cetera, so that it could refuse LGBTQ people service or discriminate against them and people with disabilities. So, what are your thoughts on that and coming up in our final 2 weeks?
Well, I think it's appalling. I mean, how can anyone deny someone state-sponsored, state paid for social services because they're LGBT? I think it goes to show you that it's the atmosphere that this president has made that states feel they can actually do something like that and get away with it. Which brings me to the other issue of the Supreme Court nominee that just had hearings, who isn't sure what the difference between sexual preference and sexual orientation is. And this is a person who has been a leading law school professor. She's been on the Seventh Circuit for 3 years, Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and she's not aware of the difference. I think that's shocking, or at least she claims she's not. So either she's, let's say she's being a little disingenuous, or she's totally ignorant. And I think that we should expect more states that want to discriminate to do this because they think they're going to have a Supreme Court that will allow this or allow it through what they would call the religious exemption, which we've talked about every week here, which is one of the reasons we should all be out voting and urging other people to vote for a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president. Again, I have to say, and maybe I'm not nonpartisan in that regard, because I think that is one of the things we really are at risk in losing with this Supreme Court. And as was brought out in one of the articles in the paper today, it would be a constitutional interpretation so that it's not necessarily possible for the Senate or the House to pass a law. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And I think, bringing up, and we're going to bring on our first guest in a second, right after this. But, when she did mention, Judge Barrett did mention sexual preference, that's such an outdated term, of course. And that implies choice, that it's a choice to be who we are. And if it's a choice to be who we are, they can make the choice to overturn marriage equality and certainly rule against protecting our community from discrimination. So it's a grave danger of what's happening in the Supreme Court for the LGBTQ community, as well as for women as it relates to choice, and so many other issues, healthcare, making sure that people are afforded healthcare for existing conditions, and just so the list goes on and on and on. And I'm sure we're going to hear from our guests some of that tonight. So, Louis, you want to take over and start to introduce our first guest?
Yeah, welcoming our first guest is New York City Council President Corey Johnson. He's been the president of the City Council since 2018. And during his time, he has passed over 185 legislative acts, which is a record, an incredible amount of stuff that's been done. He also represents District 3, and we welcome you, and we have a lot of questions for you.
Louis, I love you. You're the best. And I love David as well. And I see my friend Stuart Applebaum, an amazing progressive labor leader, is going to be joining as well. And we need to elect Jackie Gordon on Long Island for Peter King's seat. So I'm really honored to be with you tonight. And the work that David and the LGBT Network does every single day is so important. So I'm just so honored to be invited to be here to talk about the next 13 days.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Corey, for joining us. I mean, we are so excited and so appreciative. And I don't know if you could see me on the screen.
I can see you.
Okay, cool. But that, we're so appreciative that you took the time to join us today. I just want to share that no matter where you are, no matter what environment you're in, you are an inspiration to so many different folks. You bring happiness, you bring joy, you bring seriousness about the issues, and motivate people to get involved and engaged. And no one dances like you in parades as well. So, so thank you, Corey, for joining us.
And I want to also thank you for your openness and transparency about several of the issues that you face personally. I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, and I think it's really a model for many of us, because none of us are without issues. And I think it's really important that we face them and be honest about them, and I really think highly of you.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, David.
Thanks. So, just picking up a little bit on what Louis just said, I mean, you just expressed, so much, so much bravery and courage when you recently ended your bid for mayor of New York City, and I think it's really helped a lot of people. So maybe if you could just share the message, I think, for folks out there, because it is one of hope and inspiration, I think.
Sure. I mean, well, I came to New York when I was 19 years old, and part of the way that I got involved politically was because I had come out in my small town in Massachusetts as captain of my high school football team when I was 16. And I feel like my sort of entire life has been a journey about coming out in different ways, coming out about my sexual orientation, but then coming out about my HIV status, being the only openly HIV positive elected official in the state of New York, being open about my sobriety. I've been sober from drugs and alcohol for 11 years. July, I celebrated 11 years sober. And then more recently, COVID-19 has impacted all of us in different ways. And I am extraordinarily fortunate that I have not gotten sick, and no one in my family has gotten sick. But it did affect me. And I struggled with, while doing my job, while working on the city's budget, while continuing to do the work of leading the council day in and day out during this really painful time for the city, how to disclose the fact that I was struggling with depression, that it was something that was hard for me. And I sort of put it aside and tried not to deal with it until eventually it caught up with me. And talking to my therapist and starting medication, I realized it was not in the cards for me to be able to do my job as speaker, which is my primary responsibility, be a good boyfriend, be a good son, and set up a citywide mayoral campaign. And so the only thing that could come off the plate was the mayoral campaign. And instead of just saying, you know, I thought I could have won, or I'm doing this because, you know, I'm focused on my family, which is what politicians typically do when they decide they're not running for an office, I said, you know what? I've always been honest. I've been honest since I was 16 years old, and I'm going to continue to be honest now. And so that's why I disclosed the fact that I have been struggling with depression since May. I've been doing really well the last 6 weeks. I'm feeling really good. So that's sort of how I came to my decision and why I thought it was so important to be open about it, because there's still so much stigma about mental health. There's still so much stigma and having an open and honest conversation about these issues. And elected officials are just like ordinary people. We struggle with anxiety and depression and good days and bad days. And I thought it was important to be open about that.
Well, you know, Corey, I can't thank you enough for that. And, you know, we all support you 100,000% because you have done and continue to do and will continue to do, you know, just amazing things for, you know, for our community and just for all New Yorkers, too. And it takes a lot of courage to do what you've done. And like you said, so many people struggle with it, and to really be a role model to you know, to show folks about how to take care of yourself, you know, is important. And so, you know, thank you so much. But you still have a long way to go as speaker. So there's a lot more stuff to be done, and then who knows what after, you know. But you know, we've been doing this series for, I think, Louis, a couple of months now, right? And, you know, we got together and we said, you know, we got to do something to, you know, make sure that everybody gets out to vote, that everyone's registered to vote, because, you know, there were so many LGBTQ folks not registered to vote in the last election, you know, particularly in those swing states that, where Hillary Clinton lost by just 1,000 votes in some of them, you know, and there were more than 1,000 LGBTQ people who weren't registered. So we said we really wanted to bring, you know, all the guests that we have coming on to talk about why it's so important to get out there to vote, and talk about what's at stake for this election. Now, you know, as the LGBT Network, we can't tell people who to vote. We can easily provide, you know, there are two very clear paths to go down, right? And let folks make that choice, but make sure that they're registered to vote and get out to vote. So maybe if we could just share a little bit with us about what you think is at stake for the LGBT community, LGBTQ New Yorkers as a whole. So.
Well, I mean, every election we say it's the most important election of our lifetime, but literally this is the most important election of our lifetime, more important than any other election that we've probably ever seen in the last 100 years, given what the country is facing and what the world is facing. Almost 225,000 people dead from coronavirus, economic collapse, a right-wing hostile takeover of our federal government, a judiciary that's being stacked with ideologues who do not believe in fairness and equality and believe in the corporatization of America. And so this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And as Louis said at the beginning of this call, the confirmation hearings that we saw for Judge Barrett last week really showed how high the stakes are. You know, I'm not trying to be melodramatic, but I think it's important not to mince words. The country is teetering on full-fledged fascism in America with Donald Trump and with Mitch McConnell as his enabler. We are so lucky that we have a Democratic House of Representatives who has been a check on McConnell and Trump. And this election is really going to set the course, not just on fairness and equality, which we all care about. You saw, you know, a week ago, Justices Alito and Thomas, in a dissent on another opinion, said that they thought that the Obergefell opinion from 2015 on marriage equality should be overturned. So it shows how much is at stake. But so much is at stake when it comes to climate change, when it comes to income inequality, when it comes to healthcare in America, when it comes to choice and reproductive rights. All of these issues are really on the ballot. And we know that New York State and New York City are not going to be contested area on November 3rd. We are going to go for Joe Biden. That's clear. There are about 7 states that are up for grab. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Arizona. Those are the swing states. And if you have friends, if you have family members, if you can phone bank or text bank and volunteer, these are literally the most important 13 days we've probably seen since, the last World War, is my opinion, as it relates to what's at stake in our country moving forward. And so we need to activate all people. We need everyone to get out there and not just vote and make a plan to vote, but also volunteer and activate their friends and family to let them know how important this election is.
Yep, certainly. And Louis, I know you wanted to, we've been talking a lot about protecting voters. Maybe you want to take it over.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've signed up to be a poll watcher for the Democrats, and we've been warned to expect there will be people who want to disrupt, intimidate, or do other things that could delay voting or discourage people from voting. What is you doing in New York City to make sure that the polling places are secure so that everyone can feel safe, not just from COVID, we know there's special provision for that, but from intimidation from people who might not appreciate that we all have the right to vote?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big concern, and we've seen these tactics happen all over the country. Fortunately, we haven't seen a lot of voter intimidation in New York City in past elections, but we've actually seen a lot of incompetence in New York City in past elections as it relates to the Board of Elections. It raining outside 2 years ago, and there being 3-hour lines because ballots were getting wet and they weren't processing voters correctly at the doors. And so our Board of Elections has been a big problem here in the city. One of the good things that happened at the beginning of 2019, almost 2 years ago, when the Democrats took over the state Senate in New York, is they passed a series of bills to make it easier to vote in New York City and in New York State. So now we're going to have a 1-week early voting period. My voting place is the LGBT Center, so it's always really special that when I get to go cast my vote, I'm doing it in such a historic, wonderful building where ACT UP was founded and where Louis and David, you all spent many days and nights fighting for equality in those early days. My early voting site is a school in my district. And every neighborhood across the city, and I assume on Long Island as well, has early voting sites. So we really need people to make a plan. I am not that concerned about intimidation in New York City. I'm concerned about that in other places, in some of those swing states where we know they're going to try to suppress the vote, especially in communities of color. But in New York, it's really trying to get to vote early. If you sent in your absentee ballot, call and track the ballot. If you can go vote in an early site in the week before the election, do that so you don't have to wait in line on election day, because there will be lines. Those are some of the things I think that New Yorkers and voters should be thinking about in the days ahead. The first day of early voting is this upcoming Saturday in New York City, and you can go to the Board of Elections website, and it will tell you when you type in your address what your early voting site is. And the lines will not be nearly as long on the early voting days as they will be on election day. So go cast your vote early. It's a safe way to do it. That's the best thing to do.
Yeah. And so, I think that, it's great to hear about the protection in New York. I don't know if you saw that in Miami. There was a police officer who showed up to vote in a Trump mask. So on one hand, good thing he was wearing a mask. But the second piece of that was, that's intimidation, right? That's voter intimidation. And so what have you heard from, because you're not only the leader of the council in New York City, but you're a leader nationwide. So what have you heard from your colleagues across the country about what they may be doing to protect some of the voters from intimidation?
Well, I mean, we're seeing it, David, and I'm glad Louis brought it up. We're seeing it in these swing states literally every day. You had the first day of early voting in Florida yesterday. Early voting in Texas started the end of last week. Early voting in Georgia started last week. You had 8-hour lines in Gwinnett County in Georgia, the suburbs of Atlanta. in Texas, in Harris County, which has seen over 100,000 people voting a day in early voting. They have one drop-off ballot location in a county with 4 million people. So a county with 1,000 people in rural Texas has one drop box. And in Houston, Texas, Harris County, they have one drop box for 4 million people. These are intimidation tactics. These are suppression tactics. We're seeing it in these swing states all across the country. We're seeing Republicans challenge the ability for ballots that are postmarked on election day to be counted after election day. And so what has been really effective thus far, though it is a state-by-state patchwork process, depending on the circuit courts or the district courts or the state Supreme Courts, depending on the state, is there is a great group in Washington led by one of the Democratic Party super lawyers named Mark Elias, Elias. Everyone should follow him on Twitter. It's Mark, M-A-R-C, Elias, E-L-I-A-S. And he has been, for the last year, challenging the suppression and intimidation tactics in state courts and federal courts and winning almost 70% of the time and protecting the rights of voters, especially people of color. So there was a Supreme Court decision 2 days ago upholding the Pennsylvania Secretary of State's ability to count votes until the Friday after the election for ballots that are postmarked on election day, that they can't count right away. It is a state-by-state process. And I think the Biden campaign has set up legal teams in every single competitive state to work on these voter suppression tactics in the days leading up to the election, and to also have lawyers on hand on election day to be out there in a roving way to deal with these tactics. We saw this against Barack Obama in 2008. We saw it in his reelection in 2012. We saw it with Clinton versus Trump in 2016. We saw it back in Bush versus Gore in 2000, and the tactics they used in the Florida litigation afterwards. So this is the strategy of the Republican Party and of the conservative movement, and we have to be ready and aware. And I think the Biden campaign is ready to deal with these issues. They've been winning lawsuit after lawsuit in state after state to protect people's right to vote.
Excellent. That's good to hear, Ben. We can't let our guard up at all. Right? Let our guard down at all. Sometimes I get those sayings screwed up, but we can't let our guard down at all, I think is what you're saying. So, you mentioned before that, everyone needs to have a plan to vote. What is your plan to vote?
My plan is I am going to vote this upcoming weekend, on the first weekend of early voting. There's a school just 3 blocks from me in Chelsea that I can go and vote at. So I will go there probably in the middle of the afternoon when it's a little quieter. Hopefully the weather's nice this weekend so that people won't be stuck out in the rain. And I'm going to go cast my vote early. I did that last year. I voted early. It wasn't a high turnout election in 2019, but we did have the ability to vote early. And I did that, and there was no wait. I did it on a weekday. I'm going to go do it this weekend, get it out of the way, so that on election day I can be making phone calls and I can be texting for Joe Biden in those swing states.
Cool. And Louis, do you have any last questions for Corey?
And just keep it up.
Yep.
Corey, I want everyone to know who's watching. Louis Bradbury and David Kelnick are 2 of the menchiest menches of all time, and I don't think either one of them are Jewish, but maybe they are. But they are menchi, and they are people that have been doing. David is, and they have been doing this work forever. And the institutions that they have set up, Louis being the former board chair of the Empire State Pride Agenda, his work with the Calamus Foundation in funding nonprofits in New York that provide social services and that do electoral work. We are just so grateful for your leadership, not just over this past year, not just over the last 6 months during COVID, but the work you all did leading up to winning marriage equality in New York in 2011, the work that you did in setting up many of these organizations. I am immensely grateful to you as a 38-year-old openly HIV positive gay man, because you were doing this work when I was a child. And I don't mean that to make you feel old. I mean that to actually show all the work you all have done for so many years and the number of people that have benefited from it. And then lastly, I just want to say Stuart Applebaum is one of the greatest labor leaders, not just in New York City, then New York State, but in the United States of America. the work he's done with the Jewish Labor Council, the work that he's done as a vice president of UFCW, the United Food Commercial Workers nationally, his work in the AFL-CIO, his work in protecting car wash workers and protecting retail workers and protecting workers in the South who work in poultry plants in Alabama and in other states. Lewis and Stewart is an amazing man, and I'm glad you're going to hear from him. And lastly, one of the most flippable districts in the United States of America is New York 2, which is Peter King's district. And Jackie Gordon, an African-American woman who you're going to hear from, is going to win that seat if we help her. And it will be historic for our state, for Long Island. We will flip that seat that's been red for almost 30 years to be led by an inspiring, charismatic, thoughtful, substantive, historic woman, Jackie Gordon. So I want everyone to listen to her and to hear from her how we in New York City and on Long Island can help her over these final 2 weeks win this race. And that's it. I don't want to take up much more time. I just want to thank you, David and Lewis, for the work you all have done. You all are the best, and I'm grateful that you invited me to be on tonight before this historic election.
Thank you, Corey. You're too kind, and I'll vote for you anytime. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Corey, thank you. And talk about level of menschness. You're right there at the top. So thank you. Thank you, Corey. Very special to have Corey on and for him to take the time. So that's an incredible leader, incredible person. And he gave a good lead into our next two guests who we're going to bring on.
Yeah.
So let's bring on Stu and Anthony. They'll be coming on the screen, and listen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Stuart. Corey told you some things, but my good friend Stuart is the president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. He's also the executive vice president of the 1.3 million United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, and a vice president of the AFL-CIO. If that didn't keep him busy, he's also on the executive committee of the Democratic National Committee. He's chair of the Labor Council of the DNC. He's co-chair of the Resolutions Committee of the DNC, and he was one of 15 people on the Platform Committee this year. I don't know what else he has time to do, but I have to also say that when he was a member of the Empire State Pride Agenda Board, he was on the governor's working committee for marriage equality, and we all know that was very successful, and Stuart played a very important behind-the-scenes role in that very important legislation for all of us. So, Stuart, welcome.
Thank you, Lewis, and thank you, David. And just like Corey, I want to thank both of you for the extraordinary leadership you've been providing for years. The work you do and you have done has been so important for all of us. And it was Lewis who chaired the Empire State Pride Agenda and put together the strategy that resulted in New York approving same-sex marriage. And I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to you, Lewis, for that. And I also have to tell you all that I'm really excited that in just 13 days, we're finally going to be able to vote Donald Trump out of office. The network may be nonpartisan, but I'm anything but nonpartisan. And it just could not have happened soon enough. But I also want to say that while the polls look good, they don't mean that we are going to win. It means that we can win if we do what we need to do, what we know we have to do. And that includes, obviously, voting, but it also includes talking to our friends and relatives to make sure they vote and know how to vote. It means phone banking. It means reaching out to people to make sure everyone is engaged in this election. I also have to say that this election is about more than choosing who the president is going to be. I think this election is really about an existential question of whether our democracy in the United States is going to survive, because it's been under attack from an authoritarian leader, someone who coddles up to dictators around the world, someone who has corrupted our democratic institutions. And I want to thank you for holding the series of calls to make sure that people understand what's at stake this November 3rd.
Well, thank you, Stu. Thank you for really setting the tone for that. And let me bring in, let me just introduce our other guest here, who I got to know very well over the last several years, particularly in his last few years as councilman in the town of Oyster Bay, but also in his role with the International Brotherhood of Carpenters Union. Anthony Macagnoni sat on both the local and state building trades and the AFL-CIO board seats, as well as the Long Island Federation of Labor. As I mentioned, he's recently retired from the Town of Oyster Bay Council, where he served for over 20 years. And Anthony, you're the first Republican we've had on here. We've tried to get others on to come on, but Anthony was a 2012 elected New York State pledge delegate to Republican presidential candidate John McCain, and I believe you identify as a Lincoln Project Republican.
Yes, I do.
That supports Biden. So welcome, Anthony. I don't know if you want to just give a brief.
Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, Stuart, I want to thank you. My dad was almost a 50-year member of Local 1500, and I brought up on good benefits and good health care thanks to you. Guys, I'm currently living in South Carolina.
Oh.
And we started voting October 5th. I voted last week. The place has been packed from 7 in the morning to 5 at night. So the turnout is great so far. There's a big race for Senate. Lindsey Graham looks like he might have some trouble with Jamie Harrison. So it could be pretty interesting down here. But it's very important that we get all our members out to vote. I see what it's like with no unions down here. The safety on the job sites, the amount of money they don't get paid, the amount of hours they put in. It's awful. And if anybody ever takes being a union member for granted, come down here for a day and see what these people have to put up with. It's terrible. So you're right, 100% right. Getting people out to vote is the big thing. Make sure they get out. And guys, I might have been a McCain delegate and I voted for Senator McCain. That was the last time I voted for a Republican for president, to be quite honest with you. And honestly, I cast my vote for Joe Biden already. I think Biden-Harris team is the team that's going to win, and it's the best team to lead the country.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we all agree on that. But let's talk a little bit more about, I think, Corey gave a really good frame of reference, and Stu, I think it was great that, you always center us, right? No matter what, to making sure that, we come down to reality and realize that, it ain't over yet, right? And that, there's still a lot of work to do. So, where do you guys think, I mean, you're in South Carolina, Anthony, Stu, you're all over the country, with the roles that you play. Where are we at now? And what do you think we need to do more now to ensure that Biden gets elected?
Anthony, do you want to go or should I?
Stuart, please.
I think we have to do, and Anthony, it's good to see you. Stay safe. I think we have to do the sorts of things that I've talked about before, that we need to have a plan to vote. There are going to be efforts to prevent people from voting. There are going to be efforts to make sure that votes aren't cast or able to be cast. And we all have to know what we're going to do. Even with absentee ballots, we have to send them in early because of what's going on in the postal system right now. And I look at this election as really 5 elections, not just one. First, we have to win the vote. Then we have to win the count. Then we have to win the certification. then we have to win the Electoral College, and then we have to win the transition. And each of those steps can create problems along the way. In order to win the vote, we're going to need to knock on doors where that's happening, and it's happening in some places. We need to be phone banking. We need to be contacting people. And we're going to have to be ready after Election Day if people are going to challenge the vote. Trump has said that he doesn't know whether or not he'll accept the results. Trump has said that the only legitimate vote is if he wins. Otherwise, it's a stolen election. And we have to be prepared to stand up. We saw what happened in 2000, and we don't want that to happen again. It may mean that we're going to need to be in the streets. It may mean that we're going to need to protest to make sure that the count is accepted. We've even heard stories about the Trump campaign speaking to legislative leaders in Pennsylvania, saying that if they don't think the vote is right, if they don't trust the mail-in ballots, the Republican legislature will have the option of certifying another set of electors, so that there may be a set of Republican electors sent in from Pennsylvania, even if Biden wins the votes. And we have to be prepared for that. And I also want to remind people that a greater percentage of Democrats are casting their votes by mail than Republicans. So when you look at the votes that are cast on Election Day, without including all the mail-in ballots, it may look like Trump has done better than he will when all votes are counted. And so we're going to have to be prepared to demand that every vote be counted before there is any determination of who the winner is. 2 years ago, in 2018, in Florida and in Georgia, when both of those elections looked very, very close, Trump said on election night, we have to declare the Republicans the winners without waiting for the mail-in ballots, because he was afraid that the mail-in ballots would show another result. We can't let him do that again in 2020.
So yes, I mean, so Stu, I mean, you really give us the larger picture of this really being a marathon. It's not a sprint in 2 weeks, right? It's we're going to be running this marathon probably up until January 21st, I would imagine, and beyond. Perhaps.
Some people say, don't look at November 3rd as election day. We have to look at the election week until all the mail-in ballots are counted.
So Anthony, what would you like to add to that?
Well, if your members start talking to people in labor, tell them that we're under attack. I mean, Davis-Bacon, right to work. It's going to be terrible if this guy wins again and gets a Republican Senate. It's going to be the end to a lot of stuff that we enjoy. Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, was turned into a right to work state. So I can't see how a person in organized labor could vote for this guy, because he's coming after your wallet, he's coming after your paycheck, he's coming after your safety, he's coming after your future. So get out to vote and get your friends out to vote. It's very important. And I agree with Stuart. This is not going to be over with November, December, probably January. We're going to see results come in. It's going to be a battle right to the end. It's going to be awful.
Anthony, there's another issue that you alluded to, is that not only is the right to work, we don't want the right to work. We want, I don't know if everyone knows what that means, but it means that you, if your corporation or your trade is unionized, you don't have to be a member of the union and you can still get the benefits that the union negotiates by not paying dues and being a member. And there's a Supreme Court case pending that will allow some union members not to pay their dues if it's used for political contributions. Now, we know that this Supreme Court, 5-4, about 10 years ago, passed a case that basically let corporations spend as much as they want on any election under the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. That's exactly the case they're taking to allow union members not to pay their dues if they don't like the political activities of the union, which it sounds in some ways that might be fair, but it's not. It really puts the unions at a huge disadvantage in advocating for the rights for union members and workers across this country.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a shame. It's scary.
So, maybe Stu, could talk a little bit more about, we every time we've had one of these programs, we've come on and said, what's at stake in this election? Mostly we've been talking about the LGBTQ community, but the LGBTQ community makes up a good portion of the labor movement as well. So, what's at stake for the labor movement? I mean, I heard some, for both Stu and Anthony in this election.
Well, I would say that when Trump ran in 2016, he told working people that he felt their pain, that the Democratic Party had ignored them, and that he was going to support them. And there were working people who listened to him. But Trump did what he always did. He lied, because when he was in office, he did the exact opposite. Income inequality has been exacerbated by the pandemic, but also by Trump's tax breaks and giveaways to corporations. He's appointed people to the National Labor Relations Board that have used the board to try to stymie efforts of working people to have a collective voice in the workplace, to make it more difficult for workers to form unions. He has, as Anthony said, supported right-to-work laws that are geared to weakening unions and weakening workers' voices. He's challenged the right of federal workers to have a union. He's challenged the right of home care workers to have a union. And I think what's been particularly bad during the pandemic is that he's eviscerated the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, which is supposed to be protecting people on the job site and workplaces, has been missing in action during the pandemic. They refused to even issue a temporary emergency rule during the pandemic that would have protected people, would have protected working people. And it goes on and on. He's taken away overtime pay from 800,000 workers. That has resulted in a loss of over $2.2 billion in pay for working people. So when he told people he was going to support them, he's done the exact opposite. What's been particularly troublesome for members of my union who work in poultry plants in Alabama and Mississippi is that he has made their conditions even worse by saying there should be no limit on the number of birds that go by on an assembly line, where people have to cut them and get injured through repetitive motion problems, get injured all the time. And during the pandemic, what we needed to do was slow down the lines. But Trump, who said he was a friend of working people, allowed the lines to be sped up. And he has even called for legal immunity for employers who don't protect the people who work for them. His presidency has been an abomination, a disgrace for working people, and it's only going to get worse if he gets a second term. I think what Joe Biden is talking about is fairness and opportunity, and a fairer economy and protections for workers. Joe Biden has spoken more, and I think Anthony, you'll agree with this. He has spoken more about unions and working people than we've heard from any other presidential candidate in decades.
I agree, Stuart.
It's encouraging. And I think that when Biden talks about rebuilding the infrastructure, that was what Trump was supposed to do, and he didn't lift one finger to do it. So I think that what we're looking for is a fairer and more just economy for working people with a Biden administration and a Democratic Senate, if we're able to elect Jamie Harrison in South Carolina and other Democratic candidates around the country.
Sure. Anthony, you want to add to that about what's at stake for the labor movement? I mean, Stu really gave a comprehensive picture.
There's not much to add after Stuart speaks, but he's 100% right. We really, working people gotta look at the big picture. I heard the president speak a few years ago at Building Trade saying, "You told your members not to vote for me, but they did anyway." Well, our members got to realize they made a mistake then, and they do it again, they're going to make a deadly mistake to everyone's future.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think sometimes people hear, what you just presented, Stu, and Anthony, what you added on to as, oh, here they go again. But meaning that, oh, everything's so gloom and doom, and Trump is who he is. I mean, just an evil character, right? That doesn't care about anyone but himself. And, but I think what you presented is real data and real facts about what's happening to the lives of so many of our workers and so many Americans. And that, behind all these statistics are people's lives and stories, that you've been hearing about, from workers all across the nation. I think it's important to remember that when we're hearing that, nearly 220,000 people have died so far from COVID, that's a fact, and that this data science, really, really matters. So before I say anything else,
and guys, he's calling Dr. Fauci an idiot.
Yeah,
the guy who says wear a mask, wash your hands, don't social distance, don't gather in groups, and this guy's calling him an idiot. It's just it drives me crazy.
Today he was asked what he would have done differently about responding to coronavirus, and he said nothing. And look at all the people who are dead. He would have done nothing differently after all the lessons we've learned.
That says a lot there.
Yeah.
Louis. So, I know that, Louis and I talked that there's a lot of other stuff we want to cover, but I thought maybe, I don't know if it's fun to do, but, tomorrow night's the last debate, thank God. And I'm glad that they, at least went partial to changing the rules and muting the mic. We know candidates, we don't want Joe Biden to, or the recommendation is Joe Biden shouldn't get into it with them. But, if, what would you say to Donald Trump, if you are on that other lectern, where you aren't held back to, perhaps a strategy of winning the debate and not getting into it with him? So sort of laying out what the real deal is.
It would be very unusual for me to give advice to Donald Trump, but I think I would say that for the sake of the country, he has to perform differently than he did last time. I think there is a sense that not only did Donald Trump lose in the first debate, but that the whole country lost in the first debate because of the performance. I know that Republicans who advise him have been saying that he should not be going on the attack the way he has, and that he should focus on the economy, because there is absolutely nothing he could say about the coronavirus that would get him any support. And in fact, Trump said at one point that he wanted to talk only about foreign policy in this debate. He claimed that the debate commission had said that was going to be the only topic. And of course, they said that wasn't true. My advice for the sake of the country is to tone it down and have a real debate on the issues.
Sure. So maybe if, listen, I don't think anybody could give advice to Donald Trump, right? The only advice at this point would be drop out of the race. You should not be leading this nation. That's the advice we have, So, but let's say we're at that other lectern and we're Joe Biden without having any kind of filters that we need to put on. What would you say if you were the opposing candidate to Donald Trump? Why, if we could say you killed, because of your ineptitude in dealing with the coronavirus, 220,000 Americans are dead under your watch. What are some messages that we could just put out there, clear and concise, about, what's at stake really, and how you would say it if there were no filters that, that had to be on?
I think go ahead, Anthony.
I'd simply say, show me your taxes. Show us your taxes. The American people deserve to see them. Every president in history has shown the taxes. Where are yours?
Okay. Stu, would you add to that, or?
And I would hold him accountable for the horrific response to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And Lewis, imagine you had no filters. What would you say to Donald Trump?
I'd say, how can you sleep at night? And it turns out he doesn't, because he tweets all night. Said, how can you look at yourself in the mirror? And we see he does with all the makeup, so obviously he does. I don't think he has shame. I don't know what you say to him that would make a difference, other than goodbye, your lease is up, and the Secret Service will escort you to 16th Street. I don't know what anyone can say to him. I think people have to address the American people and tell them it's their responsibility and their duty for their future to vote him out of office. Yep.
And, it's his ineptitude in dealing with the coronavirus. So 220,000 Americans and counting are dead. He has ruined the economy. Our economy is in a horrible predicament because of his, again, ineptitude and so on and so on and so on. And yes, I mean, I think that's what more of that needs to be done. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's unconscionable is there's not another COVID relief bill. That the Democrats have tried to help millions of Americans stay in their homes, have food on the table, and this man, who has no risk of any of those things, doesn't care, and has said he won't do it, then he will do it, then he doesn't sure what he's going to do. Absolute abnegation of any kind of leadership to the American working person and our people. It's shameful.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one other point I want to make before we go this evening, and I want to make sure I make it, and that is that we have to hold accountable all those people who enabled him even when he's gone, especially Mitch McConnell and all the others, and the people who served in his administration.
Yep.
Agreed. Well, I think Lindsey Graham's going to have a rude awakening come November 4th, to be quite honest with you.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yes, it would be nice. It would be nice. So just as a last minute thing before we close, I mean, Stu, you have, incredible leadership positions, not only within the labor movement, but within the Democratic National Committee. And you've had that for so many years, aside from doing all the incredible work that you've done in New York when you were a member of the board of Pride Agenda, and also how much you have helped myself and the LGBT network. We couldn't be more grateful for everything that you have done in the past and everything you continue to do. So, with that, is there any insider knowledge? We know what we need to do, that we need to run, we need to run this marathon, for the next couple of months and beyond to ensure we have that leadership. But is there any kind of indication of how that down ballot, races are looking? Are we looking at really the possibility of the Democrats taking over the Senate as well, which is going to be needed to accomplish, Biden's policy agenda, Biden and Harris's policy agenda?
I'd like to say it looks good right now, but this is an unusual election. It's an unusual election because of the voter suppression efforts that keep going on. It's an unusual election because we're voting during a pandemic and we don't know what is going to happen. And I think that people are somewhat optimistic, but even if they are, we have to be fighting for every single vote because we want Trump and his enablers to be defeated by the largest possible margin in order to make an important statement about who we are as America.
Yep. So the message is get out and vote, get everyone out to vote. As New Yorkers, we certainly have relatives and family and friends in other states, especially Florida, right? So make sure that everyone, and North Carolina and South Carolina, are full of New York transplants, to make sure that we get, all the folks out to vote. So to everyone who's left with us, any last minute thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, real quick, Jackie Gordon. She's an independent woman. She's did a great job as councilperson in town of Babylon. She's going to serve the people, not just the Democratic or the Republican Party. Please get out and vote for her and help her any way you can.
Excellent.
That's a great way to end. When you finish voting for president, remember to vote for every single other office on the ballot.
Good point.
Yep. And I think, that, as I said earlier, there are two clear, distinct paths to go down. Our country, for LGBTQ community, for our the labor movement, for women, for people of color, for immigrants, for our seniors, for everything. And there is no cloudy picture there. It is as clear as daylight. And so there's only one way, if you agree on the path for human dignity, human rights, for people's, right to work and right to a fair wage. If you agree on a woman's right to choose what to do with her body, reproductive justice. If you agree on anything that has to deal with justice, whether it's economic, social, there's one path to go down. And Louis and I had been talking a lot. There is no middle ground on white supremacy and Proud Boys. There is no middle ground on that. And so a vote for, a poll came out today in Florida showing that, Florida Jewish voters, are supporting Biden by over 50% more, like 70 some odd percent to 20%. And I think it's important to put out there when we're talking about white supremacy, it should be good enough to go against it if it is just talking about, people of color. But we're talking about LGBTQ. We're talking about anti-Semitism. We're talking about, being Catholic.
You're talking about anybody that disagrees with him.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be on, an honor to see everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see everyone. Stay well, stay safe, and vote.
Wait, Louis has a last thing, and then we're going to close a little.
I want you to vote, but if at all possible, vote in person. If you feel safe doing that, it'll solve problems, and your vote will be known on election day. But still, vote only once.
Don't listen to
But
him.
for the
Don't
right
listen
people.
to him. So, and just as a quick closing, we've been doing this every other Wednesday, and if we kept to that schedule, that would be the day after Election Day. So we are going to have a special edition the day before Election Day on November 2nd. So, be on the lookout for that. We're going to have a lot of folks join us. It'll sort of be like Andy Cohen's Bravo Watch What Happens Live type of thing, where we're going to have a lot of folks on to get folks out to vote. So Stu and Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to join with Lewis and myself. And Lewis, are there any last words before we say goodbye? Nope.
Just vote early and once.
Okay, vote early, vote once.
Okay.
This Saturday in New York, early voting starts. Make sure that if you feel safe to go to the polls beginning this Saturday. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you on November 2nd.
Good night.